The frigid water of the Sabine River swallowed the screams of passengers as the Jefferson Railway Bridge gave way with an earth-shattering crack, plunging the eastbound train into the icy depths below. December 1876 had brought the harshest winter that East Texas had seen in decades, and as 23-year-old Dorothea James clung to a splintered piece of railway car, she felt her strength ebbing away with each passing second. Quinn Jameson had been tracking a pair of rustlers along the riverbank when the catastrophe occurred, the thunderous crash drawing his attention away from the hoofprints he'd been following. The 30-year-old cowboy's instincts kicked in before his mind could fully process what he was witnessing. Throwing aside his rifle and shedding his heavy coat, he spurred his horse toward the disaster, dismounting in one fluid motion before plunging into the freezing current. "Hold on!" he shouted over the cacophony of screaming passengers and twisting metal. His powerful strokes cut through the water as he made his way toward the woman in the blue traveling dress, her golden hair plastered against her pale face as she struggled to maintain her grip on the floating debris. Dorothea's fingers had gone numb, her silk gloves offering no protection against the biting cold. Just as her grip failed and she began to slip beneath the surface, strong arms encircled her waist, pulling her upward. "I've got you," a deep voice rasped in her ear. "Just breathe." She couldn't feel her limbs anymore, but somehow this stranger was moving them both toward the shore, fighting against the current and the pull of her sodden garments. Through half-frozen lashes, she could make out his determined profile, strong jaw tensed with effort, dark hair slicked back from his forehead. Eyes focused intently on the riverbank ahead. When they finally reached the shore, Quinn dragged her onto the muddy embankment, immediately checking for signs of life. Her lips had turned an alarming shade of blue, and her skin was like ice beneath his touch. "Miss, can you hear me?" He patted her cheek gently, relief flooding through him when her eyelids fluttered. Dorothea coughed violently, water spilling from her lungs as she gasped for air. The world swam in and out of focus, but she could make out the face of her rescuer hovering above her concerned brown eyes, a day's growth of beard, and a look of intense concentration. "The train," she managed to rasp. "The others, help's coming," Quinn assured her, though he had no way of knowing if that was true. "Right now, we need to get you warm." Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms and carried her to where his horse waited, the animal stomping nervously at the scent of disaster in the air. Quinn could see other survivors being pulled from the water by locals who had heard the crash, but his focus remained on the half-frozen woman in his arms. He grabbed his discarded coat and wrapped it around her shivering form before mounting his horse with Dorothea cradled against his chest. His ranch was closer than town, and every minute counted when fighting the deadly cold that had settled into her bones. "Stay with me," he murmured against her hair as they galloped through the pine forest. "Just stay awake a little longer." Dorothea tried to respond, but darkness was closing in around the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the surprising warmth of the stranger's body against hers. When she awoke, she was surrounded by unfamiliar walls and wrapped in thick quilts before a roaring fire. For a moment, confusion reigned. Wasn't she supposed to be on a train bound for New Orleans? Then the memories crashed over her like the icy water that had nearly claimed her life. "You're awake." The deep voice came from a chair beside the bed, and she turned to see her rescuer, now dried and changed into clean clothes, watching her with evident relief. "Where am I?" Her voice was barely a whisper, her throat raw from swallowing river water. "My ranch about 5 miles outside of Jefferson." He leaned forward, offering her a cup of steaming liquid. "It was closer than town, Name's Quinn Jameson. Dorothea James." She accepted the cup with trembling hands, grateful for the warmth that spread through her fingers. The other passengers, Quinn's expression sobered. "Rescue efforts are underway. I rode back after getting you settled to see what I could do. Most of the folks in the first 2 cars made it out." He hesitated. "The back cars, they're still working on those." The weight of what had happened settled over her. "My trunk, my belongings, gone, most likely," he said gently. "But you're alive, Miss James. That's what matters." Dorothea nodded slowly, the reality of her situation dawning on her. She was alive, yes, but stranded in a strange place with nothing but the borrowed nightgown she now wore. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm her. "I need to get word to my aunt in New Orleans," she said, attempting to rise from the bed only to find her limbs uncooperative. "She's expecting me." Quinn placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "There's time for that. The telegraph lines are down from the storm, but they'll be up again soon. For now, you need rest. I can't impose on you. It's no imposition, Miss James. My housekeeper, Mrs. Peabody, is here to ensure propriety, and I've got plenty of room." His smile was warm, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Besides, the doctor said you shouldn't be moved for at least a few days. You took quite a dunking." As if summoned by mention of her name, an older woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun entered the room carrying a tray of food. "Good, you're awake," she said briskly. "Time to get something warm inside you. Mr. Jameson, if you'll excuse us, I'll help the young lady eat." Quinn nodded, rising from his chair. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Peabody's capable hands. I need to check on the herd anyway. Winter's hard on the cattle." After he left, Dorothea accepted the bowl of steaming broth that Mrs. Peabody offered. "He saved my life," she said softly. The older woman's severe expression softened slightly. "That's the kind of man he is. Found me half-starved in Dallas after my husband died and brought me here to keep house. Been with him 5 years now." "Has he a wife?" Dorothea asked, immediately embarrassed by her forwardness. Mrs. Peabody shook her head. "No time for courting," he says. "Too busy building this place up from nothing." She helped Dorothea sit straighter against the pillows. "Now eat up. The quicker you regain your strength, the sooner you can be on your way." The thought of leaving brought an unexpected pang. Dorothea pushed it aside, focusing instead on the warm broth and the crackling fire. She would recover, contact her aunt, and continue her journey as planned. This was merely a delay, not a detour. But as the days passed, Dorothea found herself in no hurry to leave the Jameson ranch. Quinn proved to be not only a heroic rescuer, but also a thoughtful host. When he wasn't tending to his cattle or checking on the rescue efforts in town, he sat with her, reading aloud from his modest library or recounting stories of his 10 years in Texas. "I came here with nothing but my horse and my daddy's old rifle," he told her one evening as they sat before the fire. "Worked as a ranch hand until I saved enough to buy this land." "It's beautiful," Dorothea said, genuinely impressed by the sprawling pine forests and rolling hills visible from the windows. "Different from Virginia." "That's where you're from?" Quinn asked, watching her with interest. She nodded. "Richmond. My father was a banker there before the war." She didn't add that the family fortune had been tied to the Confederacy, and that her journey to her aunt's was born of necessity rather than choice. After he died, there wasn't much reason to stay. Quinn seemed to understand the weight behind her words. "Fresh starts can be good for the soul, Miss James." "Dorothea," she corrected him with a small smile. "After fishing someone out of a river, I think first names are permitted." His answering grin sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Dorothea it is, then." A week after the accident, Dr. Morgan declared her well enough to travel, but a severe ice storm had rendered the roads impassable. The telegraph lines were still down, leaving Dorothea effectively stranded at the ranch. "I've imposed on your hospitality far too long," she fretted to Quinn as they watched the ice coating the trees outside. "Nonsense," he replied easily. "Mrs. Peabody enjoys having another woman around, and he hesitated, a faint color rising in his tanned cheeks. "Well, the company is welcome." Something in his tone made Dorothea study him more carefully. In the days she had spent recuperating, she had come to appreciate not only his kindness, but also his quiet strength. Quinn Jameson wasn't like the polished Virginia gentleman she had known. He was forthright, hardworking, and possessed a natural dignity that had nothing to do with social standing. "Still," she said, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest when his eyes met hers, "I should make arrangements to continue to New Orleans as soon as possible." "Of course," he agreed, though she thought she detected a hint of disappointment in his voice. "As soon as the roads clear." But the winter of 1876–77 proved relentless. One storm followed another, keeping Dorothea at the Jameson ranch well into January. She insisted on earning her keep, helping Mrs. Peabody with household tasks, and even learning to make the sourdough biscuits that Quinn declared were the best he'd ever tasted. "You're a natural at ranch life," he told her one afternoon as they ventured out between storms to check on a mare about to foal. "Most city ladies would be climbing the walls by now." Dorothea laughed, surprising herself with how natural it felt. "Perhaps I wasn't meant to be a city lady after all." The words hung between them, laden with possibility. Quinn helped her down from her borrowed horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Dorothea," he began, something new in his voice that sent her heart racing. But whatever he might have said was interrupted by an urgent call from one of the ranch hands. The mare was in trouble, and Quinn's attention was immediately diverted to the crisis at hand. Watching him work through the night to save both mare and foal, Dorothea was struck by a realization that both thrilled and terrified her. She was falling in love with Quinn Jameson. The thought should have sent her fleeing back to the safety of her planned future in New Orleans, where her aunt had arranged a position as a companion to a wealthy widow, a respectable job for a woman of reduced circumstances. Instead, it rooted her more firmly to the Texas soil. By February, when the roads finally cleared enough for travel, Dorothea found herself inventing reasons to delay her departure. The telegraph lines had been repaired, and she had sent word to her aunt explaining her situation, receiving a concerned but understanding reply. "The stage leaves for Shreveport tomorrow," Quinn announced one evening, his expression unreadable as he handed her the schedule. "You could connect to New Orleans from there." Dorothea accepted the paper, her heart sinking. "Yes, I suppose I could." They sat in silence as the fire crackled between them, the weight of unspoken words making the air heavy. "Unless," Quinn finally broke the silence, then stopped, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as nervousness. "Unless," she prompted softly. "Unless you had a reason to stay." His eyes, when they met hers, held both hope and fear. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I'm just a rancher with no fancy background, but these past weeks have been the happiest of my life." Dorothea finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. The joy that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the pine trees. "Mine too." He moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I never believed in fate until that bridge collapsed and I found you in that river. Now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Dorothea's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of a happiness she had never expected to find. I was running away from a life I didn't want, only to find one I never knew I needed." "Is that a yes?" Quinn asked, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her wrists. "To what?" she teased, though her heart was already answering. "To staying. To giving us a chance." His expression grew serious. "I won't pretend it's an easy life out here, especially for someone raised as you were. There's hard work and long days, and town society isn't exactly what you're used to." Dorothea silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips gently to his. When she pulled back, his stunned expression made her laugh. "Yes, Quinn Jameson, my answer is yes." The kiss he gave her in return left no doubt about his feelings, and when Mrs. Peabody cleared her throat loudly from the doorway, they sprang apart like guilty children, though neither could stop smiling. Spring came early that year, bringing with it new beginnings. Quinn and Dorothea were married in the small white church in Jefferson, with Mrs. Peabody beaming proudly from the front pew and half the county, in attendance to witness the union of the brave cowboy and the lady he had pulled from the icy river. Dorothea's aunt made the journey from New Orleans for the wedding, bringing with her the few family heirlooms that had survived the war, including her mother's pearls, which adorned Dorothea's neck as she spoke her vows. "I never expected to find happiness in Texas," she confessed to Quinn as they danced at their wedding celebration. "But now I can't imagine being anywhere else." His arms tightened around her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jameson." Life on the ranch was indeed hard work, as Quinn had warned, but Dorothea thrived in ways she never had in Richmond society. She learned to ride astride instead of side saddle, to help with calving season, to manage the household accounts, and even to shoot a rifle when necessary. The local ladies, initially skeptical of the Virginia belle who had captured Quinn Jameson's heart, were won over by her genuine warmth and willingness to roll up her sleeves. Their first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges. A summer drought threatened the herd until Quinn's gamble on digging a new well paid off. Dorothea's first attempts at making soap ended in disaster, much to Mrs. Peabody's carefully hidden amusement. They argued about whether to expand the ranch house or build a new one, compromising on an addition that gave them a larger bedroom and a proper study, where Dorothea established a small lending library for the ranch hands, many of whom were eager to improve their reading skills. When winter returned and the anniversary of the bridge collapse approached, Quinn found Dorothea standing on the porch, staring out at the frost-covered landscape. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I was thinking about how different my life would be if that bridge had held. Do you ever regret it, not going to New Orleans?" The question was asked lightly, but she could hear the vulnerability beneath it. Turning in his arms, Dorothea cupped his face between her palms. "Not for a single moment. That bridge collapse was the best thing that ever happened to me." His smile banished the last of her melancholy. "Me too, though I wish you hadn't had to nearly freeze to death for us to meet." "Next time, perhaps we could arrange a proper introduction," she teased, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Next time," he murmured against her lips, "I'll find you without the dramatics." They stood together in the winter twilight, watching as the first stars appeared in the Texas sky. Two lives that might never have intersected but for a failing bridge and an icy river. Spring brought new life to the Jameson Ranch, not only in the form of calves and foals, but also in the tiny heartbeat that Dorothea discovered she carried beneath her own. When she shared the news with Quinn, his whoops of joy could be heard all the way to the bunkhouse, sending the hands rushing out to see what had happened. "A baby," he kept repeating, his hand reverently touching her still flat stomach. "Our baby, Mrs." Peabody, upon hearing the news, immediately set about knitting baby clothes and lecturing Dorothea on proper rest, though her stern admonitions couldn't hide her delight at the prospect of a child to spoil. As Dorothea's body changed with the growing life inside her, she found herself reflecting more on the twists of fate that had brought her to this place, this life, this love. The bridge collapse that should have ended her life had instead given her a new one, richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined in her previous existence. "You ever wonder about the others?" she asked Quinn one evening as they sat on the porch swing he had built for her. "The other passengers from the train," he nodded, his hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "I think about them often, especially this little one's namesake." They had decided that if the baby was a boy, he would be named Samuel, after a young boy Quinn had pulled from the wreckage but who had not survived his injuries. "And if it's a girl?" Dorothea asked, though they had discussed this many times before. "Hope," Quinn answered without hesitation. "Because that's what she'll be, a symbol of the hope that carried us through that day." Dorothea leaned against his shoulder, content in the certainty of their shared future. "Hope Jameson. It's a beautiful name." Summer came, bringing with it oppressive heat that made Dorothea's condition all the more uncomfortable. Quinn insisted on hiring additional help for the house, overriding her protests that she was perfectly capable of managing. "You're growing our child," he reminded her, his tone brooking no argument. "That's work enough." The young woman he hired, Maria Garcia, proved to be a blessing not only for her capable assistance but also for her knowledge of herbal remedies that eased Dorothea's discomfort better than Dr. Morgan's prescribed tonics. "My grandmother was a curandera, a healer," Maria explained as she prepared a tea of ginger and mint for Dorothea's morning sickness. "She taught me the old ways." Dorothea, who had always been curious about other cultures despite her sheltered upbringing, eagerly absorbed Maria's teachings, adding them to the practical skills she had acquired since coming to Texas. By the time autumn painted the trees in gold and crimson, she had developed a reputation among the local women as someone knowledgeable about natural remedies, and it wasn't uncommon for wives from neighboring ranches to seek her advice. "You've come a long way from that half-drowned city girl I pulled from the river," Quinn teased her one evening as she bottled tinctures for a neighbor's rheumatism. "I had a good teacher," she replied, setting aside her work to embrace him. "Several, in fact." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Just don't forget who fished you out first, as if I could." Her smile turned mischievous, though I seem to recall it was more of a clumsy dunking than an elegant rescue. Quinn's mock outrage had her laughing until her sides ached, the joyful sound filling their home with the warmth that had become the foundation of their life together. December brought a bitter cold snap, and with it, the arrival of Hope Jameson, born during a rare Texas snowfall exactly 1 year and 1 week after the bridge collapse that had brought her parents together. "She has your eyes," Quinn whispered in awe as he held his daughter for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "And your stubborn chin," Dorothea observed tiredly, exhausted but radiant with the fierce joy of new motherhood. Mrs. Peabody, who had assisted with the birth alongside Dr. Morgan, sniffed suspiciously as she bustled about the room. "She's perfect, is what she is. Now put her back with her mother, Mr. Jameson. That baby needs feeding and you need to let your wife rest." Quinn reluctantly returned Hope to Dorothea's arms, watching with wonder as the infant instinctively turned toward her mother's breast. "I never knew I could love anyone this much," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "It's terrifying, isn't it?" Dorothea agreed, understanding completely the overwhelming protectiveness she saw in her husband's eyes, to have so much to lose. He sat beside her on the bed, one arm around her shoulders and the other gently touching their daughter's tiny hand. "Not to lose," he corrected softly. "To cherish. Every day we have together is a gift I never expected." As winter settled over the Jameson ranch, the small family created their own warm oasis against the cold. Quinn added wood to the fire in their bedroom at all hours, determined that Dorothea and Hope should never feel the bone-deep chill that had nearly claimed them both. Dorothea found herself frequently recounting the story of the bridge collapse to her infant daughter, who couldn't possibly understand, but seemed to listen intently nonetheless. "Your papa was so brave," she would whisper as she rocked Hope to sleep. "He jumped into that freezing water without a thought for himself, just to save a stranger. That's the kind of man he is, the kind who puts others before himself, who sees what needs doing and does it without fanfare or expectation of reward." Filling her head with nonsense already, Quinn asked from the doorway one evening, having overheard her storytelling. Dorothea smiled up at him. "The truth isn't nonsense. She should know where she comes from, how close we came to never having her at all." He crossed the room to kneel beside the rocking chair, his expression growing serious. "I've been thinking about that, about how many things had to align perfectly for us to be here now. If I hadn't been tracking those rustlers along that particular stretch of river at that exact time, if I hadn't chosen that specific train, if the bridge had collapsed 5 minutes earlier or later," Dorothea shivered, despite the warmth of the room. "We can't think that way. We can only be grateful for what is, not what might have been." Quinn nodded, reaching out to stroke Hope's downy head. "You're right, and what is pretty damn perfect." "Language," Dorothea admonished with mock severity, though she couldn't disagree with his assessment. Spring brought new energy to the ranch as Quinn implemented ideas he and Dorothea had discussed during the long winter evenings. They expanded the cattle operation, adding Hereford stock to improve their herd. Dorothea's small medicinal garden grew into a proper herb farm, supplying not only their household but also the apothecary in Jefferson. Hope thrived, developing a curious nature and determined spirit that kept both parents constantly on their toes. By her first birthday, she was toddling around the ranch house, getting into everything within reach and charming the ranch hands with her infectious giggle. "She's going to be a handful," Mrs. Peabody predicted as they watched Hope attempt to climb onto a chair much too tall for her small legs. Just like her mother, Dorothea raised an eyebrow at this assessment. "I was under the impression that you found me quite proper when I arrived," the housekeeper snorted. "Proper, yes. But anyone who survives what you did, and then adapts to ranch life without complaint, has a backbone of steel and more determination than sense. Your daughter comes by it honestly." The observation, delivered with Mrs. Peabody's characteristic bluntness, filled Dorothea with unexpected pride. She had indeed changed from the sheltered young woman who had boarded that train to New Orleans. Life with Quinn had revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed, resilience that had always been part of her but had never been tested. As Hope grew from toddler to child, the Jameson Ranch prospered under Quinn and Dorothea's joint stewardship. They added to their property, built a larger main house with enough rooms for the growing family they both wanted, and established themselves as respected members of the Jefferson community. Dorothea never did continue her journey to New Orleans, though her aunt visited regularly, eventually moving to a small house in town when her health began to decline. The position as companion that had once seemed Dorothea's only option now seemed like a narrowly avoided cage, a life of dependence and constraint that would have stifled the woman she had become. On the 5th anniversary of the bridge collapse, Quinn surprised Dorothea with a trip to the site where they had first met. The bridge had been rebuilt, stronger than before, with new steel supports anchoring it firmly to both banks of the river. "I didn't think you'd want to come back here," Dorothea said as they stood looking down at the water, now peaceful beneath the winter sun. Quinn squeezed her hand. "I wanted to show you something." He led her to the entrance of the bridge where a small brass plaque had been installed. "In memory of those lost in the Jefferson Railway disaster of December 18, 1876, Dorothea read aloud, her throat tightening with emotion. "And in honor of those who risked their lives to save others." "I didn't ask for my name to be included," Quinn said quickly, noting her questioning glance. But the railroad company insisted. Indeed, at the bottom of the plaque, Quinn Jameson's name appeared among a handful of others credited with rescue efforts. Dorothea traced the letters with her fingertips, remembering the desperate cold, the certainty that she was about to die, and then the miraculous strength of his arms pulling her to safety. "You deserve this recognition," she told him. "You saved so many that day." He shook his head, his expression solemn. "Not enough. Never enough." Understanding the weight he still carried, Dorothea slipped her arm through his. "You can't save everyone, Quinn, but you saved me. You saved hope, and through us you've touched so many other lives." They stood in silence for a long moment, paying their respects to those who hadn't been as fortunate. Then, by unspoken agreement, they turned away from the memorial and walked back to where their horses waited. "Let's go home," Quinn said, helping her mount before swinging into his own saddle. "Hope will be wondering where we've got to, and Mrs. Peabody promised her gingerbread if she finished her lessons." Dorothea laughed, picturing their precocious daughter negotiating with the housekeeper who pretended sternness but could deny the child nothing. "Race you to the crossroads." Quinn's answering grin was all the response she needed. They spurred their horses forward, racing across the winter landscape side by side, their laughter trailing behind them like a promise fulfilled. The years that followed brought more children to the Jameson household. Samuel, born 2 years after Hope, with his father's dark hair and serious demeanor, twins Elizabeth and Emily, who arrived in the midst of a spring thunderstorm when Hope was 7. And finally, Thomas, the unexpected blessing of Dorothea's 40th year, doted on by his older siblings and parents alike. Through it all, the joys and sorrows, the prosperous years and the lean ones, the inevitable conflicts and their sweet resolutions, the foundation of their life together remained that moment of connection in the icy waters of the Sabine River. Quinn never lost the protective instinct that had driven him to dive into the frigid current that December day, and Dorothea never forgot the feeling of rebirth she had experienced in his arms. They grew older together, watching their children mature and begin lives of their own. Hope, with her mother's golden hair and her father's determination, married the son of a neighboring rancher and established her own medicinal garden, expanding on Dorothea's knowledge with formal medical training that would have been unthinkable for a woman of Dorothea's generation. Samuel took over management of the ranch operations, implementing modern methods while respecting the traditions his father had established. The twins found different paths, Elizabeth as a schoolteacher in Jefferson, Emily as a skilled horsewoman who trained cavalry mounts for the army. Young Thomas, to everyone's surprise, showed a talent for art that eventually took him to New York, though he returned to Texas frequently, drawn by the pull of family and the land that had shaped him. On the morning of their 30th wedding anniversary, Dorothea awoke to find Quinn's side of the bed empty. She found him on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she joined him. He smiled at her, the lines around his eyes deepening with the expression that still made her heart quicken after all these years. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." 30 years, she marveled, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you pulled me from that river." "And sometimes it feels like I've loved you forever," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Like there was never a time when you weren't part of me." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the new day dawned over the land they had nurtured together. The ranch had grown from Quinn's modest beginnings into one of the most respected operations in East Texas, known for its quality stock and innovative practices. Their home, once a simple cabin, was now a sprawling house filled with the evidence of a life well-lived. Children's drawings framed alongside fine art, handmade quilts draped over store-bought furniture, books lining the walls of Quinn's study and Dorothea's sitting room. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never met?" Dorothea asked, voicing the thought that occasionally still crossed her mind on quiet mornings like this one. Quinn considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had always been part of his nature. "I think we would have found each other somehow," he said finally. "Maybe not in such dramatic circumstances, but I believe some souls are meant to connect." "The romantic cowboy," she teased, though the idea resonated with her own feelings. "Who would have thought?" He laughed, the sound as rich and warm as it had been when they were young. "Only with you, Dorothea. Only ever with you." They were interrupted by the sound of horses approaching, and soon their yard was filled with the chaos of arriving family. Hope and her husband with their 3 children, Samuel and his wife, expecting their first child in the fall. The twins, Elizabeth with her scholarly fiancé and Emily fresh from a riding competition in Dallas. And Thomas, home from New York with sketches of the anniversary gift he was creating, a series of paintings depicting the history of the Jameson Ranch. As Quinn greeted their children with bare hugs and Dorothea found herself surrounded by grandchildren clamoring for attention, she was struck anew by the miraculous chain of events that had led to this moment. The bridge collapse that should have ended her life had instead been the beginning of everything that mattered. This family, this love, this legacy they had built together. Later that evening, after the celebration dinner had been cleared away, and the younger children had been put to bed in the rooms kept ready for their visits, the family gathered in the large living room. At Thomas's urging, Quinn recounted once again the story of the bridge collapse and the daring rescue that had brought him and Dorothea together. "I wasn't thinking clearly," he admitted, his hand finding Dorothea's as it always did when he told this tale. "I just saw the train go down and knew people would be in that water. It wasn't until I spotted your mother that I had a specific target." "She was the prettiest girl in the river," Thomas quipped, earning a chorus of groans from his siblings and a gentle swat from Hope. "She was certainly the most determined to live," Quinn corrected, his eyes meeting Dorothea's with a look that still held wonder. Even half frozen, she was fighting. "I had to," Dorothea said simply. "Something told me I wasn't done yet, that there was more waiting for me if I could just hold on a little longer." Hope raised her glass in a toast. "To holding on," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears, "and to the bridge that collapsed at exactly the right moment." "To the bridge," the family echoed, glasses clinking in the warm light of the fire. Later, when the house had quieted and they were alone in their bedroom, Quinn took Dorothea in his arms with the reverence that had never diminished over their years together. 30 years, he murmured against her hair, now streaked with silver but still as soft as it had been when he first touched it, wet and icy from the river. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat, even the difficult parts?" She asked, thinking of the drought years, the children's illnesses, the inevitable disagreements that had tested their bond. Every single moment, he assured her, as long as you were by my side. Dorothea rose on tiptoe to kiss him, marveling at how the spark between them had mellowed but never faded, deepening into something richer and more sustaining than the passionate attraction of their youth. "I love you, Quinn Jameson," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for jumping into that river." His answering smile was everything she had ever needed. "Best decision I ever made." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, Dorothea thought about the journey that had brought them here, not the interrupted train ride to New Orleans, but the longer path they had traveled together. From strangers thrust together by disaster to partners building a life, from young lovers to parents to grandparents, they had weathered every season together, their love like the river that had nearly claimed her life, sometimes rushing, sometimes gentle, but always flowing inexorably forward. Outside their window, a light snow began to fall, rare for Texas but not unheard of. Dorothea watched the delicate flakes swirling in the darkness, remembering another winter night when cold had nearly stolen her future. How fitting that now, 3 decades later, she could watch the snow from the safety of Quinn's embrace, surrounded by the warmth they had created together. The bridge collapse that should have been an ending had become instead the foundation of everything beautiful in her life. And as she finally surrendered to sleep, Dorothea's last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude for broken bridges, icy waters, and the brave cowboy who had pulled her not just from the river, but into a life richer than any she could have imagined. Morning dawned clear and cold, the snow transformed into a glistening blanket that covered the ranch in pristine white. Dorothea stood at the window, watching as Quinn walked across the yard to the barn, his tall figure leaving a trail of footprints in the unmarked expanse. Despite the gray in his hair and the slight stiffness in his movements that hadn't been there in his youth, he still moved with the same purposeful stride that had first caught her attention all those years ago. Hope joined her at the window, cradling a cup of coffee between her hands. At 30, she was the image of Dorothea at the same age, though with Quinn's determined jawline and direct gaze. "He still checks the stock himself every morning," Hope observed, following her mother's gaze. "Some things never change." "Thank goodness for that," Dorothea replied with a smile. "Your father's consistency has been the bedrock of this family." Hope nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "I've been thinking about your story about the bridge collapse, about how close we all came to never existing." "I think about that too sometimes," Dorothea admitted. "How a few seconds' difference might have changed everything. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, about fate and chance and all those big questions." Hope sipped her coffee, her expression reflective. "Is it luck that Dad happened to be there at that exact moment, or was it something more?" Dorothea considered the question seriously. Over the years, she had asked herself the same thing many times. "I don't know," she said finally, "but I do believe that what matters most is what we do with the chances we're given." Your father could have seen that bridge collapse and decided it was too dangerous to help. I could have let the cold take me instead of fighting to stay alive. We both made choices that day and every day after. Hope smiled, linking her arm through her mother's. "Well, I'm grateful for those choices, and I hope I'm making the kind of decisions that honor them." "You are," Dorothea assured her, thinking of Hope's work as a healer, her happy marriage, her kind and curious children. "Every one of you is building something meaningful in your own way." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as Quinn emerged from the barn with Samuel, the two men deep in conversation as they inspected a fence line in need of repair. The similarities between father and son were striking: the same confident posture, the same deliberate way of speaking, hands gesturing to emphasize important points. He taught us well, Hope said softly. To see what needs doing and then do it without fuss. To stand by our word. To value people over things. He did, Dorothea agreed, though I like to think I contributed a few lessons of my own. Hope laughed, squeezing her mother's arm affectionately. Of course you did. Dad taught us how to work, but you taught us why it matters. How to create beauty even in difficult circumstances. How to adapt without losing yourself. Touched by her daughter's perception, Dorothea blinked back sudden tears. I'm very proud of the woman you've become, Hope, of all of you. The day passed in the pleasant chaos of family togetherness breakfast, stretching into mid-morning, as conversations ebbed and flowed around the table. The younger grandchildren building snow figures in the yard under Thomas's artistic direction. Emily taking the older ones for rides on gentle ponies. Elizabeth and her fiancé engaged in a spirited chess match with Quinn, while Dorothea and Hope prepared dinner with Mrs. Peabody's granddaughter, who had taken over her grandmother's position when the older woman retired. By evening, the house was filled with the warm sense of roasting meat and baking bread, the sounds of laughter and conversation, the tangible presence of love that had grown from that first spark between two strangers thrown together by disaster. As Dorothea moved through the rooms, straightening a cushion here, adjusting a lamp there, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The path hadn't always been smooth. There had been arguments and misunderstandings, financial worries during the lean years, the heartache of a baby lost between Samuel and the twins, illnesses and injuries, and all the other trials that life inevitably brings. But through it all, she and Quinn had faced each challenge together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. The desperate connection forged in the icy river had deepened into a partnership so complete that Dorothea sometimes felt they shared a single heart beating in two bodies. That night, after the family had dispersed to their various rooms and the house had settled into peaceful slumber, Dorothea and Quinn sat before the fire in their bedroom, as had become their custom over the decades. "Good anniversary," he asked, his arm around her shoulders as they shared a small glass of brandy, another tradition, this one dating back to their first year of marriage when a rare winter storm had knocked out the power, and they had huddled together for warmth. "The best," she assured him, nestling closer into his embrace. "Having everyone here makes me realize how fortunate we are," Quinn nodded, his expression thoughtful as he gazed into the flames. "I was thinking today about that moment in the river when I first saw you in the water." "What about it?" Dorothea asked, curious about the pensive note in his voice. "I've never told you this," he said slowly, "but when our eyes met before I'd even reached you, I had the strangest feeling. Like I recognized you somehow, though we'd never met." Dorothea sat up straighter, surprised. "I felt the same thing. I thought it was just the cold playing tricks on my mind, or maybe the shock of the accident, but there was this moment of recognition." Quinn smiled, the firelight catching the silver in his hair. 30 years later, and you can still surprise me." "I never knew you felt it too." "Why didn't you ever mention it?" she asked. He shrugged, a hint of his younger self visible in the gesture. "Didn't want you thinking I was some superstitious fool, I suppose." It's not the kind of thing a practical cowboy admits to feeling like he's known a stranger all his life. Dorothea laughed softly. "And I didn't want you thinking I was a fanciful city girl with my head in the clouds." She sobered, considering the implication of their shared experience. "What do you think it means?" "I don't know," Quinn admitted. "Maybe Hope's right about fate, or maybe when you're about to die, your mind plays tricks on you. Either way, I'm just grateful it led me to you." They fell silent, watching the fire burn down to embers, each lost in their own reflections on the mysterious workings of life and love. Outside, a fresh snow began to fall, adding another layer to the blanket covering the ranch. Inside, wrapped in the warmth of their shared history, Dorothea and Quinn held each other close. Two lives that had merged into one story, a story that had begun with a desperate rescue and grown into a legacy of love that would outlast them both. As the years continued to pass, the Jameson Ranch remained a gathering place for the extended family, with grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren filling the rooms with laughter during holidays and summer vacations. Quinn and Dorothea, though slowing with age, maintained their active involvement in both ranch operations and community affairs. Their partnership, a model that younger generations sought to emulate. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the town of Jefferson honored them with a celebration that brought together people from all walks of life who had been touched by their generosity and steadfast presence. The mayor unveiled a second plaque at the rebuilt bridge, this one commemorating not just the disaster and rescue, but also the enduring love story that had emerged from the tragedy. From the darkest moments can come the brightest futures, the inscription read. The Jameson legacy: courage, compassion, and unwavering love. Quinn, never comfortable with public attention, stood with quiet dignity as the plaque was revealed, his hand firmly holding Dorothea's as it had for half a century. Dorothea, more at ease with such ceremonies, spoke briefly about the gift of second chances and the importance of reaching out to others in times of need. The bridge collapsed, but we did not fall, she concluded, her voice still clear and strong despite her 73 years. Instead, we built something new and lasting. That is the true miracle of that December day. The following spring brought an unexpected visitor to the ranch, an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as Walter Peterson, the son of a passenger on the ill-fated train. "My mother spoke of you often, Mrs. Jameson," he explained as they sat in the parlor, the same room where Dorothea had recuperated all those years ago. "She was in the first car and saw your husband dive into the river to save you. She always said it was the bravest thing she'd ever witnessed." "I wish I could have thanked her," Dorothea said, touched by this connection to the past. "She lived a good long life," Walter assured her. "Passed 5 years ago at the age of 92, but before she died, she asked me to deliver something to you if I ever found myself in Texas." From a worn leather satchel, he withdrew a small package wrapped in faded tissue paper. Inside was a lady's handkerchief, yellowed with age but still bearing the delicate embroidered initials DJ. "This was yours," Walter said. "Mother found it on the riverbank after the rescue. She always meant to return it but never had the chance." Dorothea's hands trembled as she accepted the fragile square of fabric. "I thought everything was lost in the river," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "This was a gift from my mother before she died." Quinn, who had been quietly listening, placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for bringing this to her. It means more than you can know." Later, after their visitor had departed with promises to stay in touch, Dorothea carefully placed the handkerchief in the cedar chest where she kept her most treasured mementos: Hope's first baby shoe, Samuel's carved wooden horse, the twins' matching christening gowns, Thomas's earliest sketches, and the simple gold band Quinn had placed on her finger on their wedding day. "A piece of the past returned," she mused, running her fingers over the delicate DJ. "After all these years." Quinn wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder, like the last missing piece of a puzzle. She turned in his embrace, studying the beloved face that had aged alongside her own. The strong jaw was still there, though softened by the years. The dark eyes still held their warmth and intensity. The smile lines had deepened into permanent features that mapped a lifetime of joy. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Any of it?" His brow furrowed in confusion. "Regret what?" "Diving into that river, taking on a half-drowned Virginia girl with no knowledge of ranch life, all the challenges we've faced." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a smile that still made her heart skip a beat after 50 years. "Not for a single second," he assured her. "You are the best decision I ever made, Dorothea Jameson." She returned his smile, the certainty of his love as steady as the Texas soil beneath their feet. "And you are mine, Quinn Jameson, from the river to forever." In the golden twilight of their lives, they faced the future with the same courage and commitment that had defined their journey from the beginning. The bridge collapse that might have ended everything had instead become merely the first chapter in a story that would continue long after they were gone, in the lives of their children and grandchildren, in the prosperity of the land they had nurtured, in the community they had helped to build, and in the legends that would be told of the cowboy who pulled his lady from the icy water and found forever in her eyes. And so the story that began with disaster became instead a testament to the power of love to transform and transcend, to create meaning from chaos, and to build bridges stronger than those that had fallen. Quinn and Dorothea Jameson, once strangers thrown together by fate, had become instead the foundation of a legacy that would endure for generations to come, a legacy built not on the bridge that collapsed beneath a train on a winter day in 1876, but on the unbreakable bond that had formed in those frigid waters and grown stronger with each passing day of their extraordinary, ordinary life together.